increasing rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific, intensified hostilities and aggression from the CCP, as well as a full-scale war in the Middle East that threatens to destabilize the entire region. Not since my father's war have we seen such a rise of malign nation-states seeking to upend the global balance of power. This committee deals with issues of war and peace. Diplomacy should always be the first recourse, but as history has taught us, what's past is prologue, and weakness only invites aggression. This committee has also held a long tradition of bipartisanship. As former Chairman Engel often stated, when it comes to foreign policy, partisanship stops at the water's edge. I'm honored to work with my good friend, Ranking Member Meeks, and today, Ms. Manning, to advance this bipartisan policy agenda that not only protects our national security interests, but those of our allies across the globe. So I want to thank all the members for being here today to testify on your respective bills, and I now recognize the acting ranking member, Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome our colleagues to the Foreign Affairs Committee. The House Foreign Affairs Committee works to oversee and strengthen America's international presence and ensure our nation's core interests and values are represented in our foreign policy. The jurisdiction of this committee is crucial to our national security. I know that all of us in this House, whether on the committee or off the committee, have an interest in sustaining America's global leadership. Your engagement and perspective informs how we achieve that goal. We are grateful to have this opportunity to hear from every one of you. We are living in a pivotal time. Our security, the security of our allies and partners, the strength of global stability hinges on the leadership and the unity of nations that share our values and commitments. Israel is responding to Hamas's horrific October 7th terrorist attack. Ukraine continues to bravely fight back against Putin's unprovoked invasion. In the Indo-Pacific, our allies and partners are resisting coercion by the People's Republic of China. In our own hemisphere, we are deepening our partnerships to counter rising levels of violence and the grip of gangs that terrorize communities and weaken the rule of law. And we can't forget that the climate crisis is an existential threat to the entire planet. All are reminders that our interests are global and interconnected. America is called to lead every region of the world and fight back against terrorists. We can best rise to that call with broad, bipartisan support for diplomacy and assistance whenever and wherever we can advance those imperatives. We must demonstrate how foreign policy makes a difference in our constituents' daily lives and keeps America safe and secure. The perspective each of you bring from the communities you represent or from the expertise you've developed in other committees of the House is critically important to our work. Again, I thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank the ranking member. I want to thank the members for appearing here today. Your full statements will be made part of the record. And I'll go to each member for 5 minutes to give your remarks. I first recognize my dear friend from Texas, Austin, where I live as well, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, ranking member and colleagues, and thank you for your leadership on so many critical issues that our country and the world face right now. I want to touch just briefly on 2 measures that have not been introduced, but I believe do fall well within the jurisdiction of this committee. Mr. Wilson is one of the bipartisan co-sponsors, co-original authors when we introduced the legislation. We've continued to work with your staff to try to iron out some of the specifics and make them work as effectively as possible. You, Mr. Chairman, of course, are the author of the Repo Act, of which I'm a co-sponsor. I believe we need to do all we can to push back against Russian aggression and to prepare for a day when Ukrainians have an opportunity to engage in reconstruction of the immense damage that Russian war crimes have caused. I have what I believe is a companion piece of legislation. There are Russian government assets here in the United States and scattered across the EU. There has been discussion in recent weeks about how to handle those assets. I believe that your proposal would allow the president to seize some of the assets, which I fully support. My proposal is aimed at the earnings from those assets. Secretary Yellen recently visited in Europe with the European allies and seemed to endorse the concept of what I call a war crimes tax. And the legislation, as I propose it, would have a 100% war crimes tax on any earnings the Russian government has had in the United States since the invasion, and then would give this committee authority over a fund to help the Ukrainians in their rehabilitation efforts. And so that quite simply is the approach. I believe that it's complementary, and it would be mandatory that all of that income would flow through this committee eventually to the Ukrainians. The second bill, Mr. Chairman, concerns legislation that I was the sponsor of in the last Congress that established the ban on the import of Russian oil and gas into this country. That is the law today. There's an executive order as well. However, there is a possibility that we didn't really consider at the time of how the Russians can circumvent that. And they circumvent it by sending oil to third countries, having it refined, and then the refined products can come into the United States. This bill would ban us importing oil or gas from countries that are refined products from refineries that are processing Russian oil. It basically prevents the laundering of Russian oil through a third country and to ensure that our ban is complete. And I would invite the continued input from you and other members of the committee on both these bills. We're hoping to file them next week, and we will continue working with your committee. I recognize that the most important thing is to get the Ukrainians all of the military support that they need to prevail over Putin. But I think it's important to plan for the future and to do all we can to continue to boycott and prevent the Russian economy from fueling the Russian war machine. And I thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Doggett. These are both excellent bills, great ideas. I always think that Russia, they should pay for their war crimes, not the American taxpayer. I think both of our bills are designed and targeted towards that. And when it comes to we're seeing not only Russia, but we're seeing Iran evade sanctions as well on energy. And I think that second proposal is excellent as well. And I would like to, the committee's going to need some time to look at these bills, but sure. I would like to get them on the December markup schedule. That would be the next available markup. But these are both excellent ideas.
Thank you very much, and we'll appreciate the continued advice from you and from your staff.
Well, thank you so much, and safe travel back to Austin.
Thank you.
Can I just add my thanks to my good friend, Representative Doggett, for his very creative ideas, and I look forward to seeing those bills because we all want to do everything we can to support our democratic ally, Ukraine, in its fight against Putin and his country members.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, Congressman Doggett, thank you for bipartisan leadership on these issues. And it just is really outrageous, war criminal Putin, to go around the legislation that we have to finance their activities. And it should be noted that, indeed, the invasion of February 24th, 2022 of Ukraine, the mass murder conducted at that time. But it should also be noted that, indeed, on October 7th, the second invasion by a dictator with the invasion into Israel that by Hamas, it was clearly coordinated with war criminal Putin. We had Hamas representatives go to Moscow last March, or this March. Can you imagine? There were Hamas delegations in August to meet in Moscow with top leaders of the Putin regime. And then also just this week, if people can't connect the dots, they need to look, really understand that indeed a delegation of Hamas, and simultaneously the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran were there to meet with the Putin regime and with the Russian Federation. And in the meantime, the Iranian regime has been providing drone capability to the Russian Federation to kill Ukrainian citizens. And this is all being done so clearly. And with Hamas, let's be real too. What we're talking about, the terminology really is somewhat disarming when people talk about Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis as Iranian proxies. They're puppets. The correct terminology, I would hope, and Congressman Mike Gallagher was on television earlier today identifying that the proxies of Iran are really puppets. We are dealing with a regime that has every intent, despite how people may look at it, and it's provocative by them, of death to Israel and death to America. It just can't be any clearer. And hey, we have to give recognition that they actually chant death to Israel, death to America in English for the benefit of the American people and around the world. I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I'd like to also add to that in our briefings yesterday, it was we were told that Hamas actually visited Mr. Putin at the Kremlin, and that he's actively working with not only Iran but Hamas and Hezbollah, who have perpetrated these other war crimes, in my judgment. So, with that, Mr. Dogger, thanks so much, and I'll see you back in Texas. And we now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, a woman that I came into Congress with almost 20 years ago. It's hard to believe that, isn't it? But Ms. Debbie Wasserman-Schultz.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're getting a little long in the tooth here. Maybe we don't want to talk about how long it's been that we've served together, and it's really an honor to join you and to see your ascendancy as one of our classmates, and appreciate the work that you do every single day. You and the ranking member, Mr. Meeks. I've seen the bipartisan work of this committee, and it's really so hopeful to strengthen the United States position around the world. And I appreciate the opportunity to join you for this Member Day. I want to thank you and the ranking member and the standing in ranking member, my dear friend, Ms. Manning, for the opportunity to testify today and amplify the voices of my Venezuelan American constituents. As co-chair of the Venezuela Democracy Caucus, I urge my colleagues to join me in support of the Affect Human Rights in Venezuela Act and the Voice Act. Venezuela has suffered a lost decade under the dictatorial rule of Nicolas Maduro. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled their homes, a third of the nation's 2014 population. Countless others have been displaced internally by state-backed collectivos, illegal mining, and violent drug cartels. Maduro's autocratic regime has systematically destroyed judicial and electoral independence, hijacked state institutions, and drained the country's wealth for personal gain. Once he succeeded in stealing everything his people had, including their votes, he sold access and allegiance to the world's leading despots, Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, who now provide him valuable resources to prop up his corrupt regime. The International Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela has documented Maduro's flagrant violation of human rights, torture, political imprisonment, surveillance, extrajudicial murder, and countless other charges. I'm grateful for President Biden's moral clarity and resolve in his efforts to promote a peaceful and democratic transfer of power in Venezuela. But considering these unforgivable abuses of power by the Maduro regime, we must start to plan for the day after. That starts with ensuring the fact-finding mission and other international mechanisms put in place have unceasing support from the United States. I was proud to sponsor the Affect Human Rights in Venezuela Act for this very purpose alongside 3 members of this committee, Joaquin Castro, Maria Salazar, and Mike Waltz. This bipartisan bill, which this committee passed unanimously last Congress, also provides for enhanced cooperation between the U.S., global institutions, and NGOs to ensure that humanitarian assistance reaches those in need, including Venezuelan refugees and migrants. The bill opens new pathways for promoting free media, protecting human rights, and securing the release of political prisoners, including wrongfully detained Americans. I urge the chairman and ranking member to report this bill to the House floor. I'm confident it will receive bipartisan support. Despite the ruthless efforts of the Maduro regime, Venezuela's democratic opposition has found new purpose and unity with the support of the Biden administration. In addition to securing an agreement that allowed Maduro's sanctioned assets to be distributed as humanitarian aid to Venezuelans, President Biden has been clear that sanctions on Venezuela's captors will only be lifted if the regime allows free elections, releases prisoners, and respects human rights. The opposition overcame significant obstacles to organize an independent presidential primary election, mobilizing more than 2.3 million voters, a landmark accomplishment. This resulted in the nomination of Maria Corina Machado, a fierce champion for human rights who has unified and galvanized Venezuela's democratic movement. This week, I spoke with Ms. Machado to congratulate her on this achievement and promised that Congress would do everything possible to support a free and fair election. However, in a clear breach of their agreement with the opposition, the Maduro regime has decided that Ms. Machado should not be allowed to run. The will of the people be damned, and the votes cast would be negated. Worse yet, following her overwhelming victory of 92% in the primary, the regime's kangaroo court doubled down on her baseless disqualification and suspended the election results. The criminalization of this legitimate political process reflects a well-established pattern of disdain for genuine electoral independence and repression of political opponents. The most terrifying demand is the regime's order to turn over documents identifying Venezuelan voters, considering the regime's history of retaliating against dissent through intimidation and denial of social services. As the representative of a vibrant Venezuelan community, I'm horrified by the prospect that my constituents could become targets for the simple act of voting. Because of our complete and warranted distrust in the Maduro regime, I foresaw this outcome when I introduced the Voice Act with Congresswoman Salazar. This legislation draws a red line when it comes to Maduro's desperate attempts to cling to power. The Voice Act expresses the consensus view that Venezuelans deserve support in their efforts to advance democracy. It takes direct aim at those who are enabling Maduro's tyranny by punishing individuals who are complicit in excluding Ms. Machado from the election and delegitimizing the opposition. Our bill lays out clear conditions for what a resolution of the crisis looks like, along with clear actions to achieve them. It also prescribes a broader U.S. role in ending this crisis, including a new special envoy tasked with preserving humanitarian access, managing political negotiations, and returning American hostages like Evan Hernandez. The situation in Venezuela is dire, but Venezuelans are strong. 2 weeks ago, I stood alongside tens of thousands, including many of my constituents who lined up to participate in the primary. From Austin to Manhattan to Broward County, Venezuelans stood in solidarity, some in joyful tears to cast their ballots. They told the dictator, "You may have our homes, our livelihoods, and our freedoms, but you will not take away our voice." So I ask you to join me in support of the Voice Act, Mr. Chairman, and the Affect Human Rights in Venezuela Act, so we can put an end to Venezuela's current state of criminality and corruption and initiate a new era of prosperity, democracy, and hope. Thank you for the opportunity. I yield back.
I think the gentlelady, this is an excellent bill. I've been down to the border of Colombia and Venezuela to see all the refugees coming out. It's very sad, the human suffering imposed by the dictator Maduro in Venezuela, and we need to do everything we can to help these innocent victims, many of whom have fled to Colombia, and many of whom are on their way up to here. And I would be delighted. I see you have both Mr. Castro, Salazar, and Mike Waltz as co-sponsors, yes. And I would recommend that you urge Mr. Castro and I would urge yourself to appeal to Mr. Meeks to put it on the next markup.
Happy to.
We give a balance of Republican and Democrat bills, and I think this would be a great Democrat bill to put on the markup.
Thank you very much. I'll do that.
I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my dear friend, Representative Wasserman-Schultz, and Representative Castro for staying steadfast in your leadership on the Affect Human Rights in Venezuela Act. As we all know, the Venezuelan people have been confronting a historic crisis since 2014 that includes failures in governance, economic access, security, and a worsening human rights emergency. I commend regional leaders that continue to seek ways to provide humanitarian assistance for Venezuelans. The international community must never lose hope that the Venezuelan people and in the notion that there can be a democratic resolution to this crisis. I remain hopeful that the talks in Barbados between Maduro and the opposition and the administration's support for rolling back global sanctions in Venezuela are steps that can support reaching free and fair elections in 2024 and 2025. At the heart of the matter, these restrictions only hurt the people of Venezuela, adding pressure and desperation to an increasingly difficult situation. I support the EFFECT bill because we aim to keep our focus and priority on the plight of the people of Venezuela during these challenging times. The independent international fact-finding mission on Venezuela that was initiated by the UN Human Rights Council has played a key role in uncovering the truth and keeping the international community informed. When we supported the renewal of its mandate in 2022, we were able to show support for the much-needed UN mechanisms and multilateral cooperation that develop responses to challenges we face in the region and around the world. And I thank you again for your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member. And Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz, I want to thank you and Congresswoman Salazar working together. It's bipartisan. It particularly is important to me in that as I was growing up, and we would celebrate Pan American Day at Memminger Elementary School in Charleston, South Carolina, and every year we would have a parade where you could take the flag of the country of your choice, and I always had the flag of Venezuela as we had the parade because of, my family had hosted people from Venezuela with Creole Petroleum Company to come and visit in Charleston, South Carolina with the refining capability we had. And then I'm grateful to how significant this can be for the people of Colombia. My wife and I have been the co-chairs of the Partners of the Americas program, and with Southwest Colombia, we've hosted students from Colombia. Two of my sons actually were exchange students to Colegio Bennett in Cali. And so the northern part of South America is just so critical, and it's particularly gruesome that Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in the world with great opportunity for people to succeed, and so this is particularly sad. Also, I want to commend you. I joined with you and Congressman Snyder on Saturday a joint letter urging the funding of the war, which we did not choose, of dictators' rule of gun, opposing democracy's rule of law, to support the people of Israel, to support the people of Ukraine, Taiwan, and the southern border. And it's just so critical that we indeed address all four. And I am really hopeful that we can continue that. And it's become particularly sad that over 110 times I have warned on the House floor that the global war on terrorism is not over. With the safe haven of Afghanistan, the war is coming to America. And this week, of course, we have seen presidential candidates announce that we could have an attack in our country imminent with the open borders that President Biden has allowed. And then, sadly, the director of the FBI has said, indeed, that our country is at risk. So we all need to be working together, Republican and Democrat, and I want to commend you on your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman yields, and if the gentleman would be honor us by bringing in one of the photographs of you as a child with the Venezuelan flag, I'd be happy to enter that into the record. And with that, Ms. Okay. With that, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I now recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member, colleagues. We, of course, face so many critical issues around the world today, but today I'd like to focus with you on the enduring significance of the Indo-Pacific, and particularly the Pacific Islands region of the Indo-Pacific, a region where if we don't get it right, there will be very severe consequences down the road, even more severe than what we face today. This region is not only, of course, the roots of much of our country, including my own Hawaii, but we have been a Pacific power now for over 2 centuries. People tend to forget that. Countless service members, of course, lost their lives in World War II defending freedom and security, and the post-war order, which has been beneficial to the Indo-Pacific. And our country itself administered in the post-war period the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, which included the 3 freely associated states of Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. But unfortunately, our engagement waned over time and suffered from decades of insufficient attention, a situation that the pacing challenge of China Pacific power, Russia and others, have been only too willing to exploit. In 2019, I co-founded the Bipartisan Pacific Islands Caucus with many members of this committee and others to lend specific focus in Congress to the Pacific Islands. We have worked to include the Pacific Islands in our overall approach to the Indo-Pacific across all efforts, and we have produced legislation such as our Blue Pacific Act to integrate the region in our overall strategy for Indo-Pacific engagement. Through these and other efforts, we have made promising strides towards bolstering our presence in the region and reestablishing our relationships with our island nations. This administration, following constructive initiatives by its predecessor, has now hosted 2 U.S. Pacific Islands Forum summits in Washington, D.C., and begun efforts to open embassies in Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Kiribati, in addition to diplomatic presence elsewhere. However, we have a limited window of time in which to make a new impression and again prove ourselves to be steadfast partners. To this end, I'd like to focus on 3 particular areas. Number 1, renewing the compacts of free association. Number 2, bolstering our diplomatic presence in the region. And number 3, passing measures such as the Blue Pacific Act. First, on the compacts of free association, which are our treaties, our agreements with the compact countries of Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. These have been referred to as the bedrock of our role in the Pacific by the 2020 Indo-Pacific Strategy. The State Department and the Department of the Interior, under the able direction of Special Envoy Joseph Yun, worked tirelessly to negotiate these agreements to extend the compacts for another 20 years. The administration has submitted those agreements in Congress, and it is essential that we act swiftly to pass them into law. Chair, you and other members of your committee, as well as the Committee on Natural Resources last night, introduced the renewal, which we really appreciate. We need to move on these immediately. A delay in passage of these new compacts will be seen as a failure to deliver for our closest partners in the Pacific and will undermine our efforts to prove that we are, in fact, a steadfast partner. Number 2, we must also ensure that our new diplomatic posts and other presence and outreach in the Pacific Islands are adequately resourced. The efforts to open new embassies are welcome steps in a region where just showing up is central to building trust. While it is, of course, up to the Senate to ensure that ambassadors to these new posts are confirmed in a timely manner, this committee has an important role to play in overseeing the State Department and ensuring that the embassies are, in fact, established post-haste and are fully functioning consular service-wise and otherwise. Finally, we must pass legislation like the Blue Pacific Act, which would establish a whole-of-government strategy for engagement in the region. Our bill outlines areas of cooperation between our governments and the Pacific Island nations, aligning our activities with the Pacific Island Forum's own 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. It also codifies our Pacific Partnership Strategy and requires that it be updated every 4 years, assuring Pacific Island nations that we do offer long-term partnership. By passing the Blue Pacific Act, we can demonstrate that our commitment to the region is long-term and sustainable. We have made great progress in the Pacific Islands along with the Indo-Pacific in recent years. However, now is the time that we must follow through on our commitments and ensure that our legislative efforts reflect the importance of our ties not only to the broader Indo-Pacific, but to the Pacific Islands themselves. I look forward to working with you on all of these efforts, and thank you for your time and effort.
Thank you, Congressman Case. And I agree with you. When I talk to the Asian Pacific Islands and the ASEAN islands, it seems like after World War II, we almost forgot about them. And I think China has become very aggressive in the South China Sea and certainly with Taiwan. We need to renew our commitment to those islands. It's in our national security best interest and in theirs as well. And we just hosted, all of the ambassadors came in, and I believe you were there as well, to host a reception with them to renew our support, our commitment to them. And if you will allow my staff to have some time to look at the details of your legislation, we'd be happy to consider that for markup as well. Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Case, I want to thank you for your testimony today, as well as your leadership on the Pacific Island issues. The Pacific Islands Caucus, which you co-lead with Delegate Radowagan, a member of this committee, my good friends Chairwoman Kim and Ranking Member Bera on the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, as well as Representative Wagner and Representative Sherman, has played a critical role in restoring the Pacific Islands to their deserved place at the forefront of our discussions about foreign policy here in the House. I share your views about the importance of the Pacific Islands. Under President Biden's leadership, the United States has held multiple summits with the Pacific Islands, released the landmark Pacific Partnership Strategy, and as you mentioned, we are enlarging our diplomatic footprint in the region. It's important that we in Congress follow through with the support needed to realize that ambitious strategy. Some of the specific initiatives you mentioned are excellent ways to do that. I agree COFA is critical. Yesterday, legislation was filed in the House and the Senate to implement the COFA agreements that were negotiated with the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Republic of Marshall Islands. Chairman McCaul and Ranking Member Meeks are both original co-sponsors and were deeply involved in the bipartisan, bicameral talks which produced the legislation. Their staffs have been in close touch throughout that process, and we were all very glad that we were able to retain your bill with Mr. Womack, the Compact Impact Fairness Act, in the introduced product. And Mr. Case, Ranking Member Meeks, was proud to include much of your Blue Pacific Act in his bill, the Eagle Act, last Congress to anchor the U.S. presence and leadership in the Pacific Islands. When Mr. Meeks visited Palau and Papua New Guinea last year, it became clear to him that we need to up our development investments, diplomatic engagement, and strategic presence in the Pacific Islands to remain the partner of choice there in the face of the PRC's expansive campaign for influence. A significant part of your bill passed the House last Congress, and we are all looking forward to working with you to move the bill this Congress. We look forward to our continued work together. We are very grateful for your testimony today, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, do you have any comments? Or?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, Congressman Case, thank you. And again, an example of bipartisanship. You can't do any better than being with Congresswoman Mata Radawagan and Congressman of the American Samoa and Congressman Jim Moylan of beautiful Guam. And so I look forward to working with you in any way. I also want to let you know, too, it was so impressive to me in a sad way. On October the 7th, I was in Copenhagen, Denmark, and the only television station that I could get in English was France 24. And that, as they were reporting the massacre in Israel, it was startling to me. It was Israel's Pearl Harbor is what they began with. And then it was amazing, too, the next day, the Prime Minister of Denmark spoke to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly that I was attending, and he began his speech by pointing out that what occurred in Israel was Israel's Pearl Harbor and 9/11. But it was just so impressive to me that people around the world recognize how significant December 7, 1941, and how it must not be repeated. And the way to do that, as we have dictators invading democracies, is truly through peace through strength. And so with the Ronald Reagan provisions, we need to be, again, working together to stop the invasion of Ukraine, stop the invasion of Israel, and deter an invasion of Taiwan. With this, I yield back.
Yields. And if I could follow up on that, I visited both of your territory of Guam and Hawaii. Beautiful, beautiful islands. And it is historic. I'm just going to the USS Arizona to see it's like a graveyard, a memorial site. And then to see the USS Missouri, so you see where World War II started and then where it ended. Very historic. And then we got refueling in Guam with our base there, our B-52s, and just both, I'm envious. I live in a pretty nice town, Austin, but you guys live in paradise. So, Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do, but we have to fly a long way there and back, so you've got us on that. I thank you for your comments, all of your comments. I would be remiss if I didn't thank you directly for including the Compact Impact Fairness Act that the ranking member mentioned in the compact legislation. That's really, really critical to those jurisdictions in this country who bear the brunt of the compact residents in their communities without, to date, federal assistance for those communities. We essentially are hosting the residents as part of our country's international engagement, as part of our country's foreign policy, including what you noted as security concerns. And it is fair that the federal government undertake those undertakings, and this bill would do that. It's a critical part of the compacts, and so I thank you for including that and for your efforts to hold it in throughout.
No, thank you. That compact is just critically important right now, especially right now in this important time in history as we look at a more aggressive China. So thank you so much, Mr. Case. We'll take a look at the bill and report back. And now I recognize the gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman McCaul, Ranking Member Manning, and members of the committee. I thank you for allowing me to testify before you today to speak about the importance of our maintaining close relations between the United States and the Philippines. As the representative of the island of Guam, I understand just how crucial it is for us to ensure our regional allies are confident that the United States will not abandon them or leave them deal with the PRC alone. Guam relies heavily on international trade and diplomacy to succeed. With 90% of our food on the island being imported within 3,000-mile radius from Guam, there are no states but plenty of foreign nations whose bilateral relations are of critical importance to our Pacific strategy. I have come today to testify on House Resolution 837, reaffirming the ties between the United States and the Philippines. I introduced this resolution yesterday with my colleague and fellow co-chair of the U.S.-Philippine Friendship Caucus, Congressman Bobby Scott. The Chinese Communist Party has for decades attempted to blend countries bordering the South China Sea to their will by enforcing first their 9-dash line and now, most recently, have unveiled their new 10-dash line of lands that they claim as their own. This new map boldly claims multiple provinces in India, and the islands are as far as 1,000 miles away from China's mainland. Our allies in the region have had enough with the CCP, and as self-proclaimed protector of freedom, democracy, and liberty across the world, the United States must live up to our billing and play a role in helping our allies combat China's gray zone warfare. We must aid our allies in the Philippines in defending their sovereign territory, and for that reason, this resolution calls on the U.S. and the Philippines to begin joint patrols in South China Sea. The Philippine Coast Guard and Navy have been victims of Chinese bullying. That ends now. This resolution shows the world that the United States stands firmly with the Philippines and makes clear that we plan to adhere to our commitments to the Philippine people and to foster a free and open Indo-Pacific for all. Let me be clear. Aggression against the Philippines is aggression against the United States of America. I encourage my colleagues to support this resolution and work for its swift adoption. While my resolution does not call specifically for supporting the Philippines and their resupply efforts at the Second Tomas Shoal, I believe it is imperative that our Navy assets in the region assist the Philippine counterparts in escorting future supply runs in the Sierra Madre. This will project a clear message to anyone who would challenge the laws of the sea. The United States will not tolerate those who impede on freedom of navigation or abide by rogue nations claiming land that does not belong to them. I would like to thank the committee again and for allowing me to come here today and speak about my work on this issue. I hope to have the chance to work further with you all to combat Chinese aggression throughout the Indo-Pacific. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Moylan. And I know just recently the B-52s, one of them, from Guam, a Chinese fighter jet came within 10 feet in a very aggressive posture. And I know also when it comes to the Philippines that a Chinese Coast Guard vessel rammed into a Philippine boat and almost sunk it. And again, very aggressive posture. I really like the idea of this bill. We need to reaffirm our ties with the Philippines. They have been generous to allow us to utilize the Philippines for purposes of force protection. And it'd be, I'd like to see maybe a basing opportunity as well in the future there. And I think this would be a great step forward in achieving that. I know this was introduced November 1st, so we could consider this as early as December in our December markup bill. And lastly, when I was in Taiwan, we were greeted by 10 battleships, an aircraft carrier, and 70 fighter jets to show you how aggressive Communist China has become. And then I personally was sanctioned the day I departed Taiwan. And so been to your part of the world, and I totally understand where you're coming from. And I would very much like to look at marking this up in December. And thank you for bringing this to our attention. Ms. Manning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Moylan, thank you so much for your testimony today and for raising issues that are so important to Guam, the people you represent, and to our national security as we see increasingly aggressive behavior from the CCP. Thank you again. And I yield back.
Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, it's such an honor to have Congressman Jim Moylan here. He's serving in the tradition of Congresswoman Madeline Badillo. And so that I can't give a higher compliment. And I also want our colleagues to know how much we appreciate where America's Day begins, and that's Guam, USA. We're also so grateful, too, that we look at the people of Guam having the highest percentage of participation in the military of any state or territory. And so the patriotism of the people of Guam is to be always appreciated. And then I was hoping that Congressman Case would stick around because I wanted to point out that the beautiful hotels of paradise that the chairman has identified, somehow Hawaii has copied Guam. And so the beautiful hotels and beaches of Guam clearly have been copied by the people of Hawaii. And then I want to point out, too, how important Andersen Air Force Base is for the security of the people of the Pacific, working with our new ally, Vietnam. But then, again, thank you for your recognition of the Philippines and to see a restoration of the warmest relationships that we've had for 125 years with the people of the Philippines. I know of it very personally because in the Midlands of South Carolina, an extraordinary Filipino-American community is there who are so valued and so important as we all try to work for peace and strength. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Let me just also conclude by saying that despite one member's of Congress's testimony, there is no threat that the island of Guam will tip over. So do you have any further words, sir?
I do appreciate the opportunity once again, and I look forward to continually working with this committee. And I please welcome you all to the beautiful island of Guam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here today. And I think that concludes our testimony. I want to thank all the members for their valuable testimony. Pursuant to the committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit questions, extraneous materials for the record. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.